Prologue. The last thing he could remember clearly was dying. It had been a lingering, debilitating death rather than a good clean one, more of a fading away than a discreet ending. His main emotion was one of surprise. He hadn't expected any sort of continued existence after death, and he wasn't sure what to think of his unforeseen consciousness. The more he thought about it, the more that it bothered him, especially once he felt the pins and needles sensation of feeling returning to his limbs, which dispelled the vague notion that perhaps his soul had fetched up into some sort of limbo. He had died, he was sure of it, so how was it possible that he was awake and receiving ever more uncomfortable messages from his body? He couldn't account for it, but his body demanded that he do something about it. He flexed his right hand and tried to reach up and touch his face, but found that he couldn't. His arm was restrained by straps which were comfortable but utterly unyielding. His other limbs were similarly immobilized. The fact that he couldn't move made the darkness feel closer and more oppressive. He felt panic rise up inside of him, and a claustrophobic terror beyond fear seized him in that pressing darkness and convinced him that he had been buried alive, that the air was even now running out, and that he would either suffocate or else be crushed by the heavy weight of damp earth that must surely surround the tight-fitting coffin in which he found himself. He struggled and yelled and fought, desperate to break free of his bonds and tear himself loose from his Stygian tomb, but his efforts were all in vain. No matter what he did, he was held fast. When at last his panic subsided, the logical corner of his mind, which had been quietly observing all along, informed him that there was a tube of some sort which ran across his cheek and down his throat, and what's more, his mouth and nose were covered with a mask in which the soft, constant flow of pressurized air could be vaguely perceived. He wasn't in a coffin, he was in a medical facility of some sort. Just as during the last weeks of his life in hospice care he had been fitted with a feeding tube and an oxygen mask. But how? He did remember dying, remembered it clearly. How had he been brought back to life? And why was he being kept restrained in a tiny dark cell rather than in a hospital bed?